Okay, let's get started. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanao Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Yo antah pravishya mama vacha imam prashuptam sanjeevayati akila shakti daraswadamna anyam shtahasta charana shravanatvagadin pranan namo bhagavate purushaya tubhyam lasatu shrimadananda tirtendruno hridambare yadvachaschandrika swanta santapam vinikrantati Padavakya Pramanagnan Pranamya Shirasa Gurun Vyakarishe Yata Bhutam Vishnu Tattva Vinirnayam. So good afternoon, everyone. So it's been a long break for 4 weeks. So I hope you're all well rested, have had your holidays, and fully recharged to restart our Upanishad Chintanam. We initially thought we'll take an 8 weeks break, but then there was a clear message from Sudarshan that 8 weeks is probably a bit too long, and that we need to reconvene again end of this month. So we always listen to our master. So I've decided let's restart anyway our Katha Upanishad. So today is the 19th in the series, and I'm sure folks will join us throughout the course of today's afternoon. Okay, so we're going to be doing the 19th session, but I think what is important is because we have taken off for about 4 weeks, it's a good idea to do a little bit of revision before we address or tackle the second adhyaya of Katha Upanishad. The second adhyaya is also beautiful. If you thought the first adhyaya was amazing and profound, the second adhyaya is, I would say, even more amazing and profound because we have gathered a lot of information already. So we'll be sailing through the second adhyaya fairly easily, I think. Okay, so we got Dasho Upanishads. So that's what we have been doing for the past year. I would say a year and a half. We've been focusing on Upanishads only in this forum, and we've been progressively going through various Upanishads. Okay, so in the Sanatana Dharma, there is a general feeling that we have to, at least in this lifetime, or at least in our lifetimes, having had the Manushya Janma, having had the Sadhana Sharira, we should at least make an effort to understand 10 Upanishads. So I got my first question that's come on. Why 10 Upanishads? I mean, we have discussed Vedas are infinite, so there are probably infinite Upanishads out there. There is also a view that there are at least 108 principal Upanishads. But our acharyas have at least shrunk this for us to 10 Upanishads. So why 10 Upanishads that we have to study? So anybody wants to take that question, please? Yeah.
Sorry, maybe.
Suresh, go on. Come on. Yeah, you go first. And then we got Neeta, Suresh, and Deval also. Yeah.
So maybe it is that these 10 have been picked. Understanding these gives the most relevant, or the ones that give the most, the summary of the entire text of the Vedas. It's impossible for us to go through them. Perhaps these 10 have been picked that gives us some guidelines to say that at least these 10, you could get a fair understanding of what is to be learned. So maybe that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, perfect, Suresh.
If we add Bhagavad Gita, that becomes the 11th then, right? So
yeah,
maybe it's the 11th one.
Yeah, fantastic, Suresh. Thank you very much for that contribution. Anybody else? Neetaji and Sushrut?
I think all the acharyas have made commentaries on these 10 Upanishads, and so if exalted souls like them think that they are important, they must be really. Who are we to argue with them?
Thank you, Sushrut. Yeah, that's an important point of view. Deval, did you have some contribution there?
I think it's similar to what Sureshji was saying, but I think it's also about some of the knowledge in other Vedas is repetitive, and that I don't know, I read somewhere that these 10 contain the maximum number of conceptually all the philosophy in them, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's great. Yeah, so we all got this right. So in summary, yes, the 10 the idea there is the 10 principal Upanishads. They basically cover all the aspects of Vedic philosophy or the Sanatana Dharma that we need to know about the supreme being or Brahman so that we can attain him. So all the key concepts are within the 10 Upanishads. Okay, so that's why there is a recommendation by all the big acharyas, as you should mention, that we at least need to study the 10 Upanishads. So what have we been doing in our forum? We started off with Mandukya Upanishad, which is part of the Atharvana Veda. Then we did a bit of chapter 6 in Chandogya Upanishad, which is part of the Sama Veda. And currently we are doing Katha Upanishad, which is part of the Yajur Veda, and we are halfway through this. So I got another quiz coming up there. So Yajur Veda has got 2 branches, isn't it? So Katha Upanishad is part of the which branch? Who wants to take this question?
Krishna Yajur.
Krishna Yajur.
Okay.
Yajurveda, Madhu?
Yes, okay. So there are 2 views here. So I think the correct answer there is Krishna Yajur Veda. Shukla Yajur Veda is Isha Upanishad and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And Krishna Yajur Veda is Katha Upanishad and Taittiriya Upanishad.
So Yajnavalkya did Shukla Yajurveda, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Shilaji. Yeah. So so we are currently doing a Katha Upanishad. So maybe next we'll move to Isha Vasya and then at some point we'll do Taittiriya Upanishad of Rig Veda. Okay. So moving on to the next one. So we are now doing Krishna Yajurveda. The key Upanishads of Krishna Yajurveda are Taittiriya and Kataka. So we are doing Kataka Upanishad. The Kataka Upanishad has got 2 adhyayas. First adhyaya, Prathama adhyaya, Dvitiya adhyaya. Each adhyaya has got 3 sections or chapters. So Vallis, you may call them as Valli. Prathamaha, Dvitiyaha, Tritiyaha. And what have we done so far? Prathama Valli had 29 mantras, second one had 25 mantras, and the third one had 27 mantras, together 81 mantras. So we have done 81 mantras over 6 months. So that I think is a good timeline to do an Upanishad. Generally, people say that it takes at least a year to study Upanishads properly rather than skimming the surface. And I think we are probably doing that. 81 mantras over 6 months is quite a lot of discussion. So I've got another question there, as you can see at the top. So every Upanishad that we do, we always have to acknowledge the Chandas, the Devata, and the Rishi for all the Upanishads. So for Krishna Yajurveda, for the Kataka Upanishad, what is the Chandas, who is the Devata, and what is the Rishi? So that's the next question. So who is going to take this one? All of it or some of it, if you can contribute, that will be great. So what is the primary chandas of Kataka Upanishad? Anushtu, okay? And then Devata. Who is the Devata of Kataka Upanishad? What is the primary Devata of the Kataka Upanishad? So Vamana Namaka Paramatma, okay? And who is the Rishi? So this Rishi for Kataka. Kata Rishi. So thank you, Shilaji. Kata Rishi. So Kata Rishi is the Rishi. Yama is the Rishi, Nachiketa is the Rishi, Chaturmukha Brahma is the Rishi, and primarily Hayagriva Namaka Paramatma is the Rishi. So you got to be thinking about all these great Rishis who have imparted this knowledge to us, but primarily, as both Shilaji and Neetaji mentioned, Kata Rishi. So now what we will do is, before we jump into the second adhyaya, as I said, we have covered 81 mantras. So before we jump into the second adhyaya, which has got 79 mantras, I think we need to do a little bit of Simha Avalokana Nyaya, or the revision. Yeah, revision is in English, but when we are doing Sanskrit studies of scriptures, we always say Simha Avalokana Nyaya, Simha Avalokana, like lion. Let's look back and see what's happening. We are all lions, isn't it? We have dealt with it a number of occasions. We are all lions going through this forest called the samsara. and we are attacked on various angles, but the lions don't get scared. You know, the lions are the king of the jungle. So we are now so knowledgeable in scriptures that we are the king of the samsara, and we are going through this samsara. We just look back and have a revision as to what are all the key concepts that we have actually tackled in the first adhyaya of Katha Upanishad. And what I want to do is, maybe for the first 30-40 minutes, we deal with the key concepts, and then we will try and see whether we can deal with the first and the second mantra of the second adhyaya. Okay, so the context is always important for us, right? Prakarana. Without Prakarana, there is no philosophy, or without Prakarana, we just can't understand what the philosophical text actually tell us. So let me quickly go through what the Prakarana of this is. So we know that the very first verse itself is significant, and what did it say? Ushan havai vajashravasaha sarva vedasam dadau tasyaha nachiketo nama putra asa. Okay, so that itself is significant. Ushan havai. So the very first Ushan means desirous of. Havai is Ashtaryavachakaha. That itself is surprising. For whom? Vajashravas. Vajashravas is also called Uddalaka Arunihi. He is a great sage. He has studied all sorts of scriptures. He is very much interested in philosophy. Yet this fellow, instead of doing Nishkama Karma Yoga, this fellow had Ushan or desire. That itself is quite surprising. Okay, so that is how it starts. Again, in that very first words, a lot of philosophy is compressed. So what does this fellow do? Uddalaka Aruni, he wanted to give Sarva Vedasam Dadau. So he wanted to give all the wealth that he had. And for Rishis, the wealth are the cows. So he had to give all the cows to go. That is the Vishwajit Yajna that he had to do to go to Swarga. So, and he had a son called Nachiketa. So what did Uddalaka was doing? He was giving cows to all these brahmanas and learned people who were coming to his ashrama. And he was giving them all, useless cows. And the Upanishad captures this. Pitodaka, Jagdatruna, Dugda Dohaha, Nirindriyaha, Ananda Namate Lokan, Tancha Gachati Tadadat. So this fellow was giving, the cows have eaten the grass, they've given the milk, they've had the reproduction, meaning these are old, aged, useless cows. And that is what our Rishi Uddalaka was giving. Nachiketa was seeing all this, and he says, Sahovacha Pitaram Tatakasmai Ma Dasyasiti Dvitiyam Tritiyam. So our friend Nachiketa was saying, look, if my father is going to be giving useless cows, he's not going to go to Naraka. He's actually going to go to, he's not going to go to Swarga. He's actually going to go to Naraka. And Nachiketa knew that. And he was saying, at least if my father can give me as a charity to somebody, at least I can serve their house. At least in that process, my father can get some punya, and at least through that, he might be able to go to Swarga. But the way he is doing at this point, giving all these old cows, there is no way in which he is going to go to Swarga. All that is going to happen to him is he's going to go to Naraka. So with that in his mind, with that kind of spirit, our friend Nachiketa goes to his dad and says, Tata kasmai mam dasyasiti, whom are you going to give me? Dvitiyam Tritiyam. So he asked 3 times. So our Uddalaka at that time gets irritated, and he flips and he says, Mrutyuve tva dadan. Okay, so that is the background we are familiar with, but always worth spending a few minutes understanding this background. So when the father curses Nachiketa that I am Mrutyuve tva dadaniti, Nachiketa goes. His gross body has fallen down, and then he in his sukshma sharira. Nachiketa as a jiva is always covered by the linga sharira, right? And he makes the journey. At least that is the vision. And we have also dealt with at that point. Did he actually go, or this was all a vision? Okay, so the view of certain folks is this is a vision for various reasons, and I've summarized that in those lectures. So Nachiketa has a vision, and he makes that journey towards Yamaloka. And the very next verse is profound philosophy again. Bahunamemi pratamo bahunamemi madhyamaha kims with yamasya kartavyam yenmayad adya karishyati. So this itself is beautiful. Bahunamemi pratamaha bahunamemi Madhyamaha. So what did he say? Say, okay, I will go to Yamaloka. I will go. It is nothing unique that is happening to me. It happens to everybody. Everybody go to Yamaloka. So I will just join this eternal queue, this infinite queue from Mrityuloka, that people are constantly in this queue going to the Yamaloka. Let me be in the middle. Let me be one among the middle. There are lots of folks in front of me. There are lots of folks behind me. I will go. But my only concern here is Yama has Yamadutas and lots of other exalted servants who do all the service to him. What is it that I am going to be offering to Yama? What kind of service am I capable of providing to Yama? That is my only regret, is how he is thinking, and he is going to Yamaloka. He is not going alone because the Yamadutas are taking him there. And what the Yamadutas say when he is making the journey is, Anupashya yata purve pratipashya tata pare sasyamiva martyaha pachyate sasyamiva jayate punaha. These are all beautiful, beautiful verses. Yeah. So Yamaduta is saying, Nachiketa, mate, look at all this. Your friends who have been there in front of you, look at them. What is happening to them? They're all being boiled and cooked in this kumbi paka. And these fellows who have committed all the sins, look at them. See what they are all happening to them. They'll all be boiled there for some time. And then again, they will go to samsara, to mrityuloka. This cycle happens on and on and on. Look at this. Look at this. Understand the bare facts of life. So this is another major philosophy, and we discussed a lot of things about this. Anupashya yata purve pratipashya tata pare sasyamiva martyaha pachyate sasyamiva jayate punaha. So our friend Nachiketa then eventually reaches the door of Yamaloka, the palace of Yamaraj. He goes to the door and he waits there for 3 days. Okay. And he waits for 3 days, and eventually, yes, there is a conversation between Shamala and Yama, and then Shamala and Nachiketa, and then Shamala and Yama. And eventually, Yama then gives darshan. He appears and he says, Tisro ratrihi yad avastihi gruhe me anashnan brahman atithir namasyaha namaste astu brahman swastino me astu tasman pratitrin varan vrinishva. So this is how the story begins. And our Yama says, look, I'm really sorry that you had to wait for 3 days and 3 nights. And it is, we should never let a Brahmana or somebody who's a knowledgeable person who comes to your door, never starve him. You have to look after him. And again, that gives you the idea of how the Vedic civilization was. Anashnan, Brahman, Atithir, Namasyaha. That is how Yama celebrates Nachiketa. And I've made you wait for 3 days as a repentance for that. Because you're a knowledgeable person, as a repentance for that, I'm going to give you 3 varas, 3 boons. Go for it. Ask me the 3 boons. So this is the first phase. The first Valli was dealing with these mantras as to how the Prakarana is, or the context is. So what happened next? Then our friend Nachiketa then started asking those, sorry, let me get this right. So he started asking those varas. So another key thing that we need to understand here is that the varas that Nachiketa has, they're not irrelevant boons that he's asking. He's asking very logical boons, and each one is related to another. And that is what we need to understand when we read the philosophy of Katha Upanishad. So what was the first one? He said, Shanta Sankalpaha Sumanaha Yata Syat Vitamanyuho Gautamo Ma Abhibrutyoho Tvat Prasrishtaha Ma Abhivadet Pratitaha Yetat Trayanam Pratamam Varam Vrine. So he said, look, my dad made a mistake. He was giving these old curves, and I asked him, he flipped, he got very angry, and he cursed me. But you know what? I want to go back to Mrityuloka. I want to go back into the same gross body which I left. And I want my dad to become pacified. I want my dad to give up all anger and envy. And I want my dad to receive me with all the affection. And I want to continue to do service to my father. So that is what Nachiketa asks the first boon. And why does Nachiketa want to do that? Because he wants to go to Mrityuloka, because it is only there you have the sadhana sharira to do all the good deeds, which will eventually take you to moksha. So that is what Nachiketa's view is. There is no shortcut to moksha. This is key concept. There is no shortcut. You have to have a sadhana sharira, do your acts, and then collect punyas, whatever, remove your karmas, eventually get the divine grace, and then attain moksha. That is the process. There is no way around it. Everybody has to go through this process. Even Chaturmukha Brahma has to give up his body before he goes to moksha. So everybody has to go through this. So Nachiketa knows that, and he says, look, send me back, Yama. I just want to be in my gross body and I want to do sadhanas. Okay. So, and Yama says, yeah, okay, you go, there you go. And that boon is granted. So the first boon was fairly easy for us to understand. So the other key thing I want to say is, when you look at the boons of Nachiketa, it will exactly follow the journey of souls. And this forum, journey of souls, is a repetitive theme that we talk about because that is what we are after. And Nachiketa's journey of Nachiketa should be the journey of us as souls. And that's what Nachiketa is illustrating. And that is what Katha Upanishad is also illustrating in 2 adhyayas. So once he goes to Mrityu Loka, and once he's back and his dad is happy and he's again doing all the service to his father, what should he be doing and what he should be asking? And that is what Nachiketa is thinking. He says, Swarge loke na bhayam kinchanasti, na tatratvam na jaraya bibeti, ube tirtva ashanaya pipase shokati go modate swargaloke. Satvam agnim swargyam madyeshi mrityoho Prabruhitvam Shraddhadanaya Mahyam Swargaloke Amrutatvam Bhajanta Etad Dvitiyena Vrune Varena. So he said, when I am in the Mrityu Loka, I want to do those types of sacrifices, that type of Agni sacrifice that I want to learn and do, not the one that my dad was doing, which only takes him to Swargaloka. That is not the sacrifice I want to know. I want to know about that Agni sacrifice that will take me to moksha. Look at these words. That is what he is asking. He says, Nabhayam kinchana asti. That place where there is no fear. That can be only in moksha. Even in Swarga, people have fear because they have to come down to Mrityu Loka. And look at the second line. Natatra tvam. You are not there as well. In Swarga Loka, Yama is very much there. Only in moksha, this material Yama is not there. So you are not there. Na jaraya bibeti. There is no old age there. Everybody is eternally young. So that is what I want to go. So Nachiketa's boon is very clear. He is not asking about temporary Swargaloka. He is asking about that Swargaloka where that is also called moksha. So we have done this Paramamukya Vritti, the etymology of Swarga, Swaramanam. Swa means self. Ramana means bliss. So that place where we have our own experience of our own innate bliss, that place is called Swarga in the primary etymological sense. Of course, there is the Swarga where you have the angels and everybody else dancing and having fun. Okay. So that is the second vara. And of course, Nachiketa then went through this whole teaching of what this Nachiketa Agni is, what is Trikarma Krit, and all that we have done, how we have to do our conduct in life in 3 aspects, in Kunda, in Pinda, and in Kala. And then we have done Trikarma Krit, Yajna, Dana, and Tapas. So these are all the summary essence of what Krishna has taught us in Bhagavad Gita as to how we should conduct our lives so that we shed all our karmas, we gain devotion, then we get the grace, and then we make our way to that primary Swargaloka, which is moksha. So our Guru Yama teaches this about the Kunda, Pinda, and Kala, how to contemplate the Supreme Brahman, and how you conduct your life, Yajna, Dana, and Tapas, to reach him. And then he's so impressed with Nachiketa, he then names this as Nachiketa Agni sacrifice. This is how we should all be doing. This should be our Nachiketa Agni sacrifice if we need any hope of crossing over to the non-material platform. So having taught the Nachiketa Agni, and that we assume that Nachiketa then follows this Agni and then eventually he goes to moksha. So here is the bigger question that Nachiketa wants to know. Yes, it's all good. I want my dad to be nice. I want to go back and do all the right things so that I can go to moksha. But there is this eternal question, Yama, that is plaguing me. It is not only plaguing me, it plagues all the souls on earth. This eternal question as to what is liberation, what happens, when we cross over to the non-material plane, what is our constitutional position? So teach me about about that moksha sthiti. What happens to me? What is my relationship with this Brahman? What is the greatness of Brahman? Those are all the things I want to know next. So at that point, there is this famous verse, Eyam prete vitikitsa manushye asti iti eke na ayam asti iti cha eke. Etad vidyam anushishtaha tvaya aham varanam yesha varaha tritiyaha. Yeah. So, Eyam prete vichikitsa. Prete means you shed the body. The final prete is when you have had a dip in Viraja Nadi, you have shed your linga sharira and you have crossed over to the non-material plane. That is the final death. Chaturmukha's death is also that he sheds his body and crosses and goes to the non-material plane. So when that happens, Eyam prete vichikitsa, there is a doubt. For whom? Manushye, mananashilahas, the ones that think about higher problems of life. And they ask this question, Asti iti eke. Some folks say that the souls have their own individuality in moksha. Na ayam asti iti cha eke. Some says that the soul loses its identity and it becomes one with Brahman, or it becomes Brahman. So what is the situation? I want to know from you. I am not interested in folks on earth coming up with various hypotheses. I want to know directly from you, because you are an aparoksha jnani, you are a devata, you are an aparoksha jnani, your knowledge is far superior to anybody who is on earth. So what is your view? What have you learned? Is what our friend Nachiketa is asking Yama. So at that point, and we have again dwelt a lot of discussions around how Yama addresses this problem. And this is where I think there is a key concept for us, because we need to reflect and think ourselves. We need to be honest to ourselves. Am I an adhikari? Okay, so I'm going to pause there. What does adhikari actually mean? So who wants to take that on, please? What does adhikari in our shastras mean? Okay, no worries. So the view there is adhikari is person who is eligible. Ihahi vivida samsarika dukkha darshanena viraptasya mumukshoho adhikarinaha. He who wants to get out of this cycle of samsara, which is full of suffering, is the real adhikari. So we need to actually ask ourselves the question, am I an adhikari? What is the self-test that I am going to be doing myself? Because this is what Yama did to Nachiketa. So is Nachiketa really worthy of receiving this most confidential knowledge about liberation, about the state of souls in liberation, about this Brahman in liberation? These are all such big, hefty concepts. Is this fellow really worthy of receiving this knowledge? Okay, so at that point, that is the first test. And how do you understand whether somebody is really after this most confidential knowledge or not? The first thing is material temptations. Is this person moving towards material things or not? So how do we test that? We need to test, and we need to test ourselves. Are we having a predisposition always attracted to material things, or we are more swayed towards non-material things? And if that's happening, what is that percentage? Are we 20%, 80%, 90%, 10%, or 50%, 50%? So we need to start thinking about this. And also, once we learn our scriptures more and more, we should also watch out whether we are having that ego in us. Okay, so Nachiketa is testing these two things. These are fundamental: egolessness, no material temptations. So unless we are able to conquer these two things, material temptations and ego, is very, very difficult to become a sincere adhikari. Yeah, and that is what Yama is telling us through Nachiketa. over so many verses, and I don't have to go through these verses again, but that is what essentially is. Initially he says, no, why do you want to know about these questions? I will give you all the wealth, I will make you a king, I will make you a Chakravarti, I will make you live one Manvantara, I'll make you live one Brahmakalpa, I'll give you all the wealth, I'll give you cows, I'll give you gold, I'll give you all these beautiful women, all these beautiful apsaras from Swargaloka, this and that. But our friend Nachiketa is just not moved. He is not tempted. And in fact, he actually teaches, it almost feels like he's actually lecturing Yama and teaching him. Shobhavaha martyasya yad antaka yetat sarva indriyanam jarayanti tejaha api sarvam jivitam alpameva tataiva vahaha tavanrutya gitehe. न वित्तेन तर्पणीयो मनुष्ये लप्स्यामहे वित्तम अद्राक्ष्यम चेत्वा जीविष्यामो यावदीष्यसि त्वं वरस्तु मे वरणीयः स एव. He said, whatever you give, Yama, everything is temporary. Even if I live for 1,000,000 years, the last day, then I'll realize that it is temporary. Even the life of Chaturmukha Brahma is also temporary. He may live for eons and eons, but his life is also temporary. Your life itself is temporary. You live only for one Manvantara. How are you going to give me life until one Brahmakalpa? Don't kid me with all this, because I know everything is Shobhavaha. We have done that very profound philosophy of Nachiketa. And this is what we need to be thinking. These two mantras, Nachiketa is giving us a summary of the whole philosophy of life and the whole teaching of Bhagavad Gita. He is actually telling us, look at this. Do you really want me to accept all these material temptations, which are all temporary things? No, I don't want this. Varastu me varaniyaha sa eva. Just teach me what I've asked for. Don't waste my time with any of this. So that was the first important message for us, material temptations. Okay? That doesn't mean we have to shun everything and go into a forest and hide and go into isolation. Some folks do that. But for the majority of us who are in this samsara, I think we live in this world. We live in this world and that's it. We don't make this as our sole purpose. We need to also live beyond this world, is what the message, as you know, from the Gita is. So no material temptation, and Nachiketa proves that he doesn't have any material temptation. What about ego? And again, if you may recall, during the second Valli and then the third Valli of the first Adhyaya, again and again, Yama will say, oh, you are so knowledgeable, you're so amazing, you know everything, I'm really impressed with you, etc., etc. Again, and he will even say, look, I'm wearing this gold ornament around me, take this, I'm so happy, I'm going to take it and give it to you. So Nachiketa will say, no, thank you very much, sir. I don't want any of these things. And Nachiketa demonstrates that although he understands, in fact, at one point, Yama will say, look, I've told you so many things. Why don't you repeat what I have told you so far? So Yama is testing whether Nachiketa has actually understood. And what Nachiketa does is he repeats everything that Yama has taught him, clearly indicating that he had understood everything. That is how intelligent he is. And at that point, Yama actually praises him and says, so you're such a super intelligent boy. I'm really proud of you. You are the best student I've had. I'm so fortunate to have a student like you. And he goes on tangentially and praises Nachiketa. But then Nachiketa is still very clear. He makes it very clear that he's not interested in any of this. Yeah, he says, I want only that information. Your self-praise does not work for me. Yeah, and this verse is good. Anyatra dharmad, anyatra adharmad. Yeah, etra asmad, krutad, akrutad, anyatra bhutacha, babhyacha, yet tat pashyasi tadvada. I don't want anything else. I don't want your praising. Just teach me about this. Teach me about what I have asked. So at that point, Yama is super impressed at this point. As the Katha Upanishad progresses, as Nachiketa's true personality comes out, Yama is actually, he is completely bowled over. He's speechless. He's super impressed. He said, my God, what a student have I got to teach. This is my fortune that I have such an elevated student. And then he starts off the teaching. Okay, so material temptations and ego. So we need to be watching. Now, yes, of course, there are lots of other things that Gita teaches us, but two things is easy to remember: material temptation and egolessness. If we can work around these two concepts that is discussed in detail in the first adhyaya, I think we can make a lot of scriptural, philosophical, and spiritual progress in our lives. Okay. The next concept that the first adhyaya also talks about is the path souls take based on their intrinsic attributes. Okay. This is also a self-test for us. When we go to the T junction in the road, do we take the left turn, which is towards Shreyas, or do we take the right turn, which is towards Preyas? And again, Nachiketa has given us a lot of discussion about what is Shreyas and what is Preyas. Perhaps maybe I'm going to pause at this time and get folks to contribute about Shreyas and Preyas. So over to you guys. So who wants to come on and tell us something about what is Shreyas? Pragnesh, go for it.
Shreyas is righteousness, as Arjuna is taught by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, that what may not seem to be useful in short term, but might be useful in long term. And it may have a wider implications.
Wonderful. Yeah. Super, Pragnesh. Yeah. Anybody else wants to come here, please?
Yeah, Madhusudan, this is Harish. So Preyas is for that which is pleasurable, and Shreyas is that which is right.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Harish. Yeah. So yeah, both of you got the points. Now you nailed it. So Shreyas is something that looks unpleasant right now, but in the long term, that is the right thing for the soul. Doing satsang, picking up books and making an effort to study, go and ask questions, find a guru, spend at least a couple of hours, at least 1 to 2 hours a day studying the scriptures, do comparative analysis of what other religions have to say. Doing all this comes with a lot of effort and hard work. That sounds painful at this point, but in the medium to long term, it will be beneficial to you. So that is Shreyas. And prayers, as Harish very beautifully mentioned, is something that feels pleasant now, but in the long term, it's only going to be injurious to us. Yeah, I will go to a party every Friday. I will watch a movie every Saturday, Sunday. Every evening, I'm going to have a glass of wine. It all sounds pleasurable right now, but in the medium term to long term, it is going to be injurious to you. So that is Shreyas and prayers. But there is the bigger philosophical question is, why is it some people choose Shreyas, whereas some people don't? And only minority, there is a significant minority who seem to be going towards Shreyas. Why is that happening? Am I, in every act that I do, am I going towards Shreyas or prayers? And I remember Suresh's, one of the Suresh's presentation for our Vedic retreat, he was bringing these ideas about how do I reflect in whatever activities that I do as to whether I'm following the path of Shreyas or am I following the path of prayers. So Suresh, do you want to come in there and give us an idea of your own experience as to how do you do it in your day-to-day life? You're a busy chap, but how do you get around this?
Madhu, just in the sense so when you reflect, when you look back on something, and then it's usually in retrospect, at least that's what I have. And then you try to rationalize and say, was that the right thing? Why did we do it? I mean, did we do it just because it was immediately, was it the right thing to be doing? Or what was the context in which we did something? And maybe just sometimes, maybe that was not the right thing to be doing, but something made us do it at that point of time, though we were aware of a few other things. So many a times it does happen. I mean, we take decisions instantaneously, but I think taking time to reflect and just try and figure it out, not that we are able to place and say that that was the most appropriate or the best thing to have been done at that point of time. There perhaps is a greater purpose. How does one rationalize and contextualize so that our own interpretations and preparedness for the next act perhaps is better, is how I was At least with
Yeah.
Veena and me, we were contemplating.
Yeah, fantastic, Suresh. Thank you. And I'll also want to share my own experience. When I go to work and I have a rather annoying email that comes from a colleague or from management, when there is an annoying email that comes, do I have to quickly respond to it and put all a very angry email, or just need to sit back and then think about it and then respond to it? So that is, I usually bring these kind of ideas at that point of time and say, look, why am I doing the right thing here, etc. And then sit on it and then draft an email which will be much more, diplomatic and much more non-confrontational. So that has helped me. But most people don't do it. They follow to prayers. Why? Avidyayamantare vartamanaha swayam diraha panditam manyamanaha dandramyamanaha pariyanti mudaha andenaiva niyamayata andaha. So Yama, in this most beautiful verse, very famous verse of the Upanishad, says people are following prayers, majority follow prayers because of ignorance. It is this ignorance that is the biggest problem. And the only way of getting rid of ignorance is to go towards knowledge, which is what Shreyas is. And then we have spent a lot of time around ignorance, what it is, who has ignorance, Jiva has ignorance, Brahman has ignorance, and so on. So go back to those lectures and understand what is that ignorance that Yama is talking about. Yeah. And at that point, he also brings about this knowledge. Naisha tarkena matirapaneya prokta anyenaiva sugnanaya preshta. He says, God cannot be known through logic. He can be known only through scriptures. And he who knows that he is different from this Brahman, he is eligible for Sugnanaya. He is eligible for moksha. Whereas he says, Ananya prokte gatiratra nasti. Ananya means he who thinks, I am this exalted Brahman. Yama in this verse says, Ananya prokte gatihi atra na asti. Yeah. So all those things we have discussed enough and more. So go back to that. So once he takes first that approach as to why some go towards knowledge and majority in ignorance, then he starts talking to us about who this Brahman is, the fundamental concepts about Brahman. So these are all important that we need to know. Without these fundamental concepts of Brahman, yeah, so this is not just a Brahman of the Hindus, it is the Brahman, the universal Brahman of all religions and all philosophies. Who is that fundamental? What is that fundamentals about Brahman? That is what Yama talks again in one of these most amazing verses. Sarve Vedaha yatpadamamananti. Tapamsi sarvani cha yadvadanti. Yadichanto brahmacharyam charanti. Tatte padam sangrahena bravimi om ityetat. And here we understood that God can be known only through revelatory scriptures. No other way. You need to start with a faith in the scriptures. When you have that faith that the scriptures will tell you about Brahman, and then once you go into the scriptures, eventually through his grace, you will know him. There are lots of exalted souls who have taken that path and achieved that. And that is why our scripture says he can be known only through the Vedas. Okay. And Yama says, in one short form, he says, Bravimi. In a very shortened version, I'll tell you who this Brahman is. He is Om. Om iti yetat. Okay. And then he goes on and gives a few ideas for us. And we have done this before. Many of the names that we see in the Upanishads are not proper nouns. They are etymological and they give you an idea of the attributes of Brahman. So he goes on and tells us about some fundamentals about Brahman. Etad eva aksharam Brahma. Etadeva aksharam param, etadeva aksharam nyatva, yo yadichasi tasya tat. So understand this Brahman is aksharam. This Brahman is Om. He is also aksharam. He is called Brahma. He is Parama. Etadeva alambanam sreshtam. He is the most exalted supporter of the universe. Etadeva alambanam param. Etadeva alambanam nyatva. Brahmaloke mahiyate. He who knows about this person and then worships him, gets his grace, evidently at some point he'll go to Brahmaloka. So that Brahmaloka can be Vishnu Loka or the Loka of Chaturmukha Brahma. And in that place, once you reach the place of Chaturmukha Brahma, yeah, or once you reach moksha, what happens? Na jayate mriyate va vipaschit, na ayam kutaschit, babuva kashchit, ajaha nityaha shashvato ayam purano na hanyate hanyamane shabire. So in that Brahmaloka, which is Chaturmukha's world, or in moksha, what he describes that state of the jivas there, they are not born again. Na jayate mriyate va. They are not born, They don't die. They're just there. And once the Brahma Kalpa is over, they'll cross over the Viraja and join the Supreme. Or once they join the Supreme, there of course Najayate Mriyate. They are deathless there. And then he says that person who will make you do that, he gives you an idea of this contradictory attributes of the Supreme present in the same space-time correlation. We talked about this, the omnipotence. Anoraniyan mahato mahiyan na atma asya jantoho nihito guhayam tam akratuhu pashyati vitashokaha dhatu prasadat mahimanam atmanaha. So we understood this verse, Anoraniyan mahato mahiyan. He is smaller than the atom and he is bigger than the universe simultaneously. So this Achintya Adbhuta Shakti concept of the Brahman, which is a universal concept across all religions of the world. Asino Duram Rajati Shayano Yati Sarvadaha. That is also another idea. He's sleeping, but he's also running everywhere. Yeah. Mahantam Vibhum Atmanam. So this guy is Mahantam. He's Vibhum. He's everywhere. Atmanam. He's inside you. He's your Swami and all that. So those are all the key ideas of Brahman that Yama gives to Nachiketa. Okay, and this Brahman, not only in our situation here, so as you know, Purusha Shukta has said, Pado Asya Vishwabhutani, Tripadasya Amrutandivi. This aspect of Brahman that is there here in the material world has all these aspects. And of course, Tripadasya Amrutandivi, even in the Moksha Sthiti, these aspects are always there. And then he concludes that section with a very important statement. Na ayam atma pravachanena labhyaha na medaya na bahuna shutena yam yevesha vrunute tena labhyaha tasya yesha atma vivrunute tanun swam. So you have to reconcile the first verse and the last verse here. Here he said he can be known only through the Vedas. And here he says, Na ayam atma pravachanena labhyaha na medaya na bahuna shrutena. Even if you know all the Vedas, you may not know him. Okay. Who is going to answer that? What is the answer to that? We've discussed that before. Why? How do you reconcile this? Yeah.
Madhu, I think it refers to the grace of the Lord, because you can read as much as you want, but until he decides that he wants you to have his vision and grace, you can't do anything.
Beautiful, Sushrut, perfect answer. So that grace, so that the concept of grace comes there. Okay, so, and how do we reach this Brahman? Hard facts about our route to salvation. And this is what our friend, our Guru Yama does in the third Valli. How do we reach Brahman? There is no shortcut. If anybody says, give me $10,000, I'll take you to Brahman, it is not going to happen. Because Yama is the gatekeeper of the journey of souls. And this is Yama's statement. And he says, there is a long journey for that. And that long journey we have discussed in the third Valli. Okay, and how do we do that? Yama has given a beautiful metaphor of viewing our body as a chariot. Atmanam ratinam viddi, shariram ratamevatu, buddhim to sharatim viddi, manaha pragraham yevacha, Idriyani hayanahu Vishayanteshu gocharan Atma Indriya Manoyuktam Bhukte Riti Ahur Manishinaha. And again, one of the most important verses of Katha Upanishad. If there is one verse that is practical for us to memorize, this is probably it. That we apply this every day in our life, use our body and look at our body, brain, mind, and indriyas, and our intellect, and us as jivas, and the Brahman who is controlling all of us. Everything is compressed in this most wonderful metaphor, and how we use this body to move towards Shreyas. And then how even our movement towards the Shreyas, and the Yama talks about all these indriyas and the various components of a body, none of it is yours, mate. Yama is saying, none of it is yours. You did not decide in whose womb you're going to come. You did not create this body. You did not create the Indriyas. There are all these concepts of Abhimani Devatas that Yama talks about and says, look, your journey, the journey of the souls towards Shreyas needs the grace of all these Abhimani Devatas. That is the Vedic pantheon. And then to introduce the idea of Vedic pantheon, he has done a lot of verses. He has said so many verses that he discussed that we need their grace. They are our gurus, and they will take us to the Supreme Brahman. And to that he says, Uttishtata, Jagrata, prapya varan nibodata. Okay? And he says, get up. And this is interesting because when this dialogue between Nachiketa and Yama is happening, it is not happening in isolation. They are not alone in Swargaloka. There are all the other folks in Swargaloka who then congregate. They are all sitting there and listening to this great conversation that is happening between Nachiketa and Yama. And then at that point, Yama, then he looks at the audience, he looks at others who are here and says, Uttishtata, Jagrata, wake up. Wake up. Why are you in deep slumber? Wake up. Ask me questions. I will give you varans. Yeah. This path towards the Brahman is not an easy one. It is like walking on a razor's edge, but it can be reached. So this is what Yama says in those inspiring, words in the third Valli. Okay. And, when this is all happening, and I'm pleased that over the last 45 minutes, we have had a real whistle stop tour of the first Adhyaya. So when this is happening and there are all these people around in Swargaloka, they're all listening to this conversation between Nachiketa and Yama. Nachiketa just wants more. Yes, Yama has gone into highest levels of philosophy, but he says, Yama, tell me more. I want to know more. I'm so impressed. I'm so interested in what you are teaching me. Tell me more. I want to have more knowledge. And as I said, Yama is super impressed with Nachiketa's intelligence, his grasping power, his enthusiasm, and his determination, and most importantly, his humility. Okay, so these are some of the qualities that we need to acquire if we need to become Nachiketa, because that is our only journey for salvation, that we all become Nachiketa. So we need to look at all these aspects that Yama is impressed with, because if Yama is not impressed with us, there is no scope for us, because we'll be going round and round in samsara only. We will not go beyond his Yamaloka. So we need to be thinking about these things. So Yama is super impressed, of course, with Nachiketa. And he said, yeah. And as he said this before, he said, you are such a good student. Will I not teach you? Of course, I'll teach you. And then he starts the second Adhyaya. So at least that is how the documentation of the Upanishad is, that the second Adhyaya is, once the groundwork has been done, once the basic concepts have been introduced, then Yama takes on another level of philosophy. So this is over 79 mantras, which hopefully we will do over the next 6 months, and hopefully we should finish before Christmas. The Katha Upanishad, talking about further aspects of philosophy that Yama is going to be talking about. And if we all thought in the first Adhyaya, he has spoken enough, he has covered enough philosophy, let me reassure you, there is lots more to come. Okay, so I'm just going to take a couple of minutes break at this point to say, if anybody wants to contribute anything, any other ideas that they have learned from the first Adhyaya over the last 6 months. Okay, that's fine. So I think maybe I've done I've covered all the key concepts in the first Adhyaya. So today I'm very happy to introduce the second Adhyaya. We got about 10 minutes, maybe 10-15 minutes to deal with at least the first mantra of the second Adhyaya. So let's do that and close today's session. So when Nachiketa said, look, I want to learn more, I want to know more, Yama then, he goes back to this idea of Shreyas and prayers. He goes to the idea of the Ratham. Yeah, if you can remember this Ratham, let's go back to that verse. So this particular verse about this Ratham. Yeah, let's see if we can have folks contribute to this. So anybody wants to take this analogy of the chariot and explain how we can equate the components of our body to this chariot. So who wants to take this? I'll recite the mantra, or Pragnesh, go for it. Yeah.
So the 5 Indriyas are the 5 horses. Then the rein is intellect. The chariot rider is the mind. And the passenger is the jiva.
Yeah, excellent. So you got 90% right. Anybody wants to make a slight correction to Pragnesh? The sequence?
May I correct myself?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
rein
you
is
can.
mind. Rein is mind, and the chariot rider is intellect.
Okay, well done. Yeah, that's good. So 100 out of 100. So perfect. So that's what he had done. The Indriyas are the horses, the rain is the mind, the charioteer is the intellect, and the passenger who's asking the rider, take me to Kew Gardens in London. So that's what he's saying. And this fellow is a jiva, and he's riding this chariot, which is the body. Okay. So Yama comes back to this again, and he's asking the question. And the discussion there is, if this supreme being is so gracious and he is so great, why has he designed the sadhana sharira? Yeah, so we have a sadhana sharira with all these 5 indriyas, they're all facing outside, right? And Yama is asked a fundamental basic question: why has this happened in the evolution? Why is it that the system is such that things are by default, things are always facing outside? If God is so generous, if the God is so benevolent, why can't he just make all jivas to go inside? He's asking that key question. So that is what this verse is. Again, it's a very famous verse, frequently cited by many learned people. Paranchikani vyatrinat swayambhuhu tasmat parang pashyati na antaratman kashchid dhiraha pratyagatmanam aikshat Avruta chakshuhu amrutatvam. This is a beautiful verse. And then the way the sequence of thought will go in this is another interesting idea. I'll come to this. So the second verse, he then talks about this a bit more. Once he does the first 2 verses, what we will have to do is, once we have discussed this, we will have to jump to the second valley, because over the last thousands of years, what's happened is some of the verses have moved to different valleys. So the authentic rendering of the Katha Upanishad is, once we have done the first 2 verses, we have to go to the second valley and do the 6th, 7th, and the 8th verse, and then come back to the rest of the verse in the first valley. Okay, so what is the substance of the first valley? Why all of us are not aiming to reach Brahman? So Yama continues his explanation of the journey of souls. And he says, you know why, Yama, this is the situation? Paranchikani vyatrinat swayambhuhu. So let's look at this word, paranchi. Paranchi means outside, always facing outside. Look at this horse. These horses is such a perfect example, because the horses are always facing forwards. They are not facing towards the rider, is it? They are always facing outwards. Look at our Mundaka Upanishad figure also. Dvasuparna sayuja sakaya samana vriksham parisheshva jate. Tayor anyaha pipalam swadati anashnananyaha abhichakashiti. This fellow is also facing forwards and eating this fruit. This horse is also facing forwards. So outside, it's facing externally. Paranchi. Kani means Kani literally means sense organs. Vyatranat, Swayambhuhu. So Yama says, you know why this is happening? All the Indriyas are facing externally. Because the Supreme Brahman, when he created all the animal species, we know all the 9 stages of creation, right? And we've done lots of talks on creations. So in that, we understood that all these things are happening, and we have Jiva gets a material covering, and that is their creation. And that material covering has various aspects, including sense organs. All these are made in such a way, evolutionary, they are only facing towards the external material objects. Why? Because God made it so. Why? And he says, you know, this Brahman, Vyatrinat, he did not create, he said, let me just create it very casually. That's Yama's view. He said he did not take great, attention. Oh, the sense organs are so important for these material bodies. I have to create them with great care. He said he casually, effortlessly created this. Vyatrinat means created. Who created this? Swayambhuhu. And we know the Swayambhuhu is very popularly used in various Indian temples. God only knows why they use that. But the Vedas talk about Swayambhuhu, essentially means Swayambhuhu. Swayameva, Swatantra. Swayambhu means the supreme being. Swatantra means independent. Swayameha, he is uncreated. The Swayambhu, the uncreated, created the bodies of souls, material bodies for the souls, effortlessly, not giving great attention to them. Said, I will create this. The reason why I want to create this is some folks need it, mate. Some folks need it to find their own salvation. What is their salvation going towards material world? Who wants to take that question up? What is the salvation for those who are always facing forwards and who are always towards material things? What is their salvation? Yeah, Sushil, Nita.
So they could be Nitya Samsari, so they keep coming back, or if they are engaged in too much of prayers, then they will end up in Andhatamas.
Beautiful, Suresh. Perfect, Sushil. Perfect answer. Yeah. So this is bigger philosophical question for us to think about. Why do we have sense organs facing externally? If God is so great, he could have made sure that our sense organs also face internally and we are constantly introspecting. No, because some souls need it, because that is their attribute. They just want to find their destination. Some of them, like Duryodhana, will go to Andhatamas, whereas some of them, like me, will go to Nitya Samsarin and circling around here. These fellows need it, and that is why I have made it. So external sense organs are there for jivas to act out their intrinsic attributes so that they can find their salvation. And why is that so? Because in the very next verse, Yama puts a very, very important verse there. He says, Kashchit dhiraha pratyagatmanam aikshat. But there will be only few fellows, Kashchit, only few fellows, dhiraha pratyagatmanam aikshat. Okay, so let's look at this. Who's going to recite this verse? 7.3 from Gita, please. The famous verse that we are all very familiar with.
Shall I, Madhu?
Yeah, Sheilaji, go for it.
Manusyanam sahasreshu kaschit siddhaye yatatamapi siddhanam kaschinmam veti tattvataha.
Yeah, and thank you, Sheilaji. Beautiful. So Krishna has very clearly said in 7.3, Manush, there are only minority. There is a significant minority who are after the truth. And even among them, only a significant minority will actually know the truth as it is. Okay, so that is exactly the idea that Yama says is Kashchit dhiraha. Kashchit means someone very rare. Who? Dhiraha. Dhi plus Ra. We have done all this etymology of Dhiraha many times. So what is the meanings of that? As somebody who's enthusiastic to gain knowledge, who's brave and determined and is able to invest 2 to 3 hours a day and read and memorize and understand, go to satsang, listen to lectures, etc., etc. Who is knowledgeable. And one who rejoices in knowledge. That knowledge actually gives him happiness. It doesn't give him pain. It gives him happiness. That is why he goes through this process. Essentially, Yama is saying, like Nachiketa. Kashchit dhiraha pratyag atmanam aikshate. So pratyag literally means inside. Okay, something that is inside. That is, aikshate means sees. So Yama says, most of them, their external indriyas are facing outside and they are towards material pleasures and become either Nitya Samsarians or Tamo Yogins. But there is Kashchit dhiraha, there are some Satvika souls who are the ones who are more towards knowledge and go towards Shreyas and understand and eventually see this Pratyagatmanam. That is that Atmanam that is inside them, that Antaryaman is what he is talking about. So some fellows who move towards knowledge eventually with divine grace will see this Antaryaman. And how does he do it? And this also Yama has given in a very brief way. And he says, how does he do it? How does this dhiraha, instead of constantly looking externally, how does he do this? What is the process? And Yama, in a very in his way of putting it all in a very shortened version, he says, Avritta chakshuhu. What that person will do is he will cover his external eyes. That is the first process. Cover your external eyes. Avritta chakshuhu. when we close the external eyes. That means what? When we close the external eyes, means just me closing the eyelid is not going to work. It is that practice, that sadhana that we do, that eventually we move away and away from the material temptations and become egoless and go more and more inwards. And when that happens, we know you eventually will reach that stage of aparoksha jnana, or the opening of your third eye. Yeah. So that opening of your inner eye is going to happen when you close your external eyes. So avrutta chakshuhu, and he will also have amrutatvam ichan. Yeah. He will have a desire that I should not be born again. Okay. I don't want these temporary things, but I want to experience my own intrinsic bliss or swarupananda. Desires of that amrutatva, he will do avrutta chakshuhu, and then eventually he'll be able to see his pratyagatmanam aikshat. Whereas the majority will just do paranchikani vyatranata swayambhuhu tasmat parang pashyati na antaratman. The majority of the fellows will not even think about this antara atma, that is your antaryamin. Okay. So these are all very, very clear words from Yama, again reiterating some of the concepts that we know. But in the subsequent verses in this Valli, he's going to deal with this more and more. And in the next verse, he will again go Parancha Kaman Anuyanti Balaha Te Mrityo Ryanti Vidatasya Pasham Atadiraha Amrutatvam Viditva Dhruvam Adruveshu Ihana Prartayante is the next verse that he is going to talk to us in next week. Okay, so on that note, I'm going to close today's session. I think we did a good 1 hour, and it's a good practice for us to start engaging in Katha Upanishad contemplation again from this month. And I hope this the whole revision was helpful. And the first verse of second Valli again gives you a philosophical approach to all this. Yeah, this is not a sentimental approach. This is more of a philosophical approach. Think about evolution. Think about why the indriyas are there, why the external material things are there. Why is it like this? Why has God designed it that it should be this way? So those are all the questions that Yama wants us to ask. And this is how Vedic philosophy is. And in all that I have told you so far, there is nothing sentimental here. There is no dogmas here. These are all hardcore philosophies of life that Yama is talking to the whole of humanity. And in the next verse is that idea of talking to whole of humanity. Mrityor yanti vidatasya pasham. These Yama's nods does not happen only for folks in India or the followers of Sanatana Dharma. It happens to everybody. So that's what Yama talks about. We'll deal with all this in the next class. So on that note, Krishna Pranamastu, and we'll take any discussions and Q&As today. Thank you so much for rejoining Katha Upanishad Chintana.
Madhu, Suresh, just
Yeah.
one, maybe on the question on the why our indriyas have been designed to be externally facing. Isn't it that the very definition of sadhana is to redirect the indriyas from external facing to be internal facing? And that's what we would mean by sadhana in the sadhana sharira. If they were already internal facing, then the concept of sadhana itself could become questionable, right? So I'm just wondering if that's the kind of an understanding, would that be meaningful?
Yeah, Suresh, thank you for that. Yeah, I agree with you on this one. So we need to start somewhere, and that's somewhere is you use this chariot and you are driving, and instead of going to the cinema theater, you go to your local Hindu temple. Instead of watching TV, you go to your study room and do some reading. So that is all required. So that is required. So you can re-engage your sense organs externally in the right way. That will give you a direction, but eventually you have to go internally. Yeah, Atma Indriya Manoyuktam Bhokteritir Ahur Manishinaha. You know that verse. So you have Atma Indriya Manoyuktam. Eventually, your Indriyas of your soul itself needs to experience the pleasure inside, which is the antaryamin. Because let's not, I mean, that is another discussion for next week. Indriyas, these external indriyas are not really the indriyas. These are just the magnifying glasses as is described. The real indriyas are on the number one, on the linga sharira. And then there is the indriya of the jiva swarupa itself. That has to turn inward. So there is so many process that needs to happen, but you are absolutely right. You need that external India, at least you get your bearings right, but eventually you have to make that inward journey. But some of us, what we do, we don't come to that stage at all of actually making that inner journey. We are always only externally facing. So Yama here, I think what he's telling us is, for those kind of people, that indriyas are required. For those types of people who have the predisposition to become a nitya samsarin, or a ones that will make the journey to the eternal hells, those fellows will always need that indriyas externally facing. So our Supreme has created this so that that lot can attain their salvation that way. And then there is this dhirahas who will make the inner journey with his grace. So it is
You
about
mean divinizing, Madhu? You
Sorry.
mean divinizing the Indriyas? I mean, like in the Bhakti Yoga, the ISKCON people, they say, listen God's thing and eat prasadam, like that, divinizing all the Indriyas.
Yeah, you can. So that would be that would be, you're right,
That is
Srilaji.
the
That would be the
beginning,
first
isn't it?
stage. That's the
Yeah,
first
yeah.
stage of the process.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
eventually it needs to go inwards, because most of us are stuck in that external phase. We just go to the temple and do some puja, whatever, and feel, oh, we have done our bit and that's it. We are going to go to moksha. But the scriptures are very clear that is not going to give us liberation. It's helpful to doing that external stuff, but eventually it has to go internal. And I think that is what Yama is telling us categorically, that we need to think about this process and this problem much more seriously, rather than just a weekly visit to the temple as a solution to our salvation, which is not going to happen.
I mean, this is like meditating with open eyes, isn't it? We
Yeah.
have to meditate with open eyes, think about Atman or Paramatman.
Yeah, beautiful, Shilaji. So that meditation needs to happen inwards, and that's why Yajnavalkya, in that famous verse, he said that, right? Atmava are drashtavyaha, shrotavyo mantavyo, nitidyasitavyaha maitri. Yeah.
Practice it,
Yeah, wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay, so if we don't have any further questions, Harish is there in the audience. So Harish, take us through Omkar recitation and we'll close today's session. Thank you, everyone. We'll catch up next week again. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Madhu. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I enjoyed.